The motion is, be it resolved that the corrupt will remain masked because citizens allow it. And on the affirmative side, seated to your right are Shiv Sao and Megan Gomez, who last year emerged victorious in the Integrity Commission's tertiary level debates. They were really quite astonishing, and we're really very pleased that they agreed to come back and debate today, even though they are no longer at COSTAT. So thank you so much for coming. And the negative team, seated on your left, are Cheyenne Telfer and Rondell Keller, who are with Transparency's youth arm, and I believe they're based at UE. Yeah? Where are you? Yeah. And you are from? Right. Right, so Cheyenne is working. So thank you for coming. So the rules are that each speaker has 7 minutes to stand and deliver. Then one person from each team makes a 3-minute summation. The sound that keeps us in line is the buzzer. I have coerced my brother, Graham, into being the timekeeper, which is a clear case of reverse nepotism. So the team members have to wait for a double buzz before they begin, right? So they'll come up, stand and wait, and then the double buzz will start the debate. 1 minute into the debate, the buzzer will sound once, and that means that points of information may now be made. And that's the kind of thing that really makes it interesting. At least 2 points of information should be made and taken. If this were a real debate, they would be penalized if they did not make them or take them. Towards the end, at the 6-minute mark, the buzzer will sound again, and that means no more points of information, and at 7 minutes, a double buzzer, and that's the end of the debate. So the adjudicators are actually you, the audience, and we start the debate by asking, by a simple show of hands, how many of you believe that the corrupt will remain masked because citizens allow it? Okay, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3. Right, I get about 21. And how many of you believe that the corrupt will not remain masked because citizens allow it? 1. All right, so last year, the entire audience voted one way, and at the end of the debate, the entire audience voted the other. It'll be interesting to see what happens today. So I'm going to call the first affirmative speaker to the podium, Megan Gomez of COSTAT, formerly of COSTAT.
Good afternoon, Madam Moderator and all distinguished guests. My colleague and I are here today to affirm the motion, be it resolved, that the corrupt will remain masked because citizens allow it. And before we get into that, we must first define some terms. Transparency International describes corruption as the misuse of entrusted power for personal gain. For that reason, we have chosen to look at corruption through the lens of white-collar crime. Crimes like fraud, bribery, embezzlement, and money laundering. Also, when we speak about citizens in this debate, we are acknowledging all citizens of a country, and for the purposes, again, of this debate, primarily Trinidad and Tobago. This is inclusive of all economic classes, age groups, and sectors of business. Now, our opponents might try to tell you that the people working for governments and institutions are somehow separate from the everyman. But we believe that each individual is responsible for their actions. This is why we, on the affirmative, have included citizens who work for institutions and governments, because things like the judiciary, executive, legislative, protective forces, media, government parties, are all elected, forged, and run by citizens of the country. For example, of the 6,500 police officers in Trinidad and Tobago, before they are allowed to apply, they must meet certain qualifications. The first on that list of qualifications is to be a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. For a person to be elected as a member of the House of Representatives, Section 47 of the Constitution states that that person first be a citizen, of Trinidad and Tobago. From the snow cone vendor around the savannah to the president of the country, we are all citizens. Now, the essence of the debate that my colleague and I are going to bring to you today lies in transparency and accountability. Citizens allow the corrupt to remain masked by doing two things. The first being by not participating in their roles as citizens, and the second being by not putting pressure on the corrupt. I can't stress it enough. Citizens allow the corrupt to remain masked because we are falling short in our roles and our duties and our responsibilities. As stated in an article published by the Trinidad Express in June 2015, 2 national banks, First Citizens and Republic Bank, were listed among 6 regional banks that completed wire transfers of large sums of money for several FIFA executives, including former FIFA Vice President Jack Warner. Now, it's a good time to point out that most of the staff in these banks are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The person who is accused is a very prominent figure of Trinidad and Tobago. No, thank you. The head of the FIU, Susan Francois, was questioned about this, and she responded, and I quote, "The FIU is an intelligence gathering agency. We receive reports of suspicious transactions from banks and certain business sectors. We evaluate, analyze, and we send it to law enforcement agencies. We are not in a position to investigate matters." So tell me, what is happening here? It seems that along the line, the citizens who are supposed to handle law enforcement agencies are not holding up their end of the rope. The second point that I was getting to before. We are allowing the corrupt to remain masked by not putting pressure on them. Most times we know what is going on, and yet we do nothing. We are starring in a movie, and we don't even want to watch it. In this society, no thank you, citizens have fallen prey to complacency. When we read that Trinidad and Tobago has placed 72 out of 168 countries on the Corruption Perception Index with a score of 39, we engage in corner bar peekong or sensationalize social media activism as a form of outrage, rather than petitions and protests that live long after the hype has died down until justice is served. A government is nothing without people. I can't stress it enough. An institution is simply a building if it doesn't have people in it. A piece of legislation becomes tangible only when it is passed by citizens and only becomes useful to us when it is upheld by us. Recently passed legislation like the Public Procurement Act and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015 and the pending Whistleblower Protection Bill 2015 are great, of course, but they only serve us if we pressure those who are assigned to apply them. When you don't speak out, you allow the corrupt to remain masked. The corrupt remain in these masks of successful business owners, of hardworking politicians, of people who genuinely care about the country's well-being. Imagine waking up one day and having a collective public readily decide that they are willing to vote a person out of power or refuse to do business with someone because they are corrupt, and instead introduce consequence and justice.
Would you not accept that the voting out of the last government was the citizens rising up to an issue of corruption and citizens therefore taking their duty at a task?
I do accept that, yes. But I do believe that that is just the skim of it, because the people aren't voting to put in powers that they want there. They're voting the lesser of two evils. So I would like to just end by using a very prominent song in our society. In David Rudder's A Madman's Rant, he sings, "Somebody clean out the weed real fast. Somebody let in the cocaine pass. Somebody promised to abolish the tax. Somebody promised to give we the facts. Somebody promised to clean up the land. But in this clean land, rats still killing man. Who is that somebody? Who is the somebody who is cleaning the weed real fast and letting the cocaine pass? Who is that somebody? We are that somebody. We are that somebody when we refuse to take ownership of our roles as a citizen and not put pressure on those who allow corruption to breed. Therefore, it is bittersweet for us to stand here today and affirm that the corrupt will remain masked because citizens allow it. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. And I call upon the first negative speaker, Cheyenne Telfer.
Good day, moderator, distinguished guests. I'm here to explain to you that the corrupt will eventually be unmasked because citizens will not stand for their corruption. There are two key arguments that substantiate this. The first is that technology, social media, and online platforms are now making commonplace the resources necessary for unmasking the corrupt. The second is that the reach of cultural globalization, which is shifting values toward transparency and whistleblowing, is inescapable. First, I wanted to examine who are these persons who unmask the corrupt. What makes that person? Persons who unmask the corrupt are persons whose desire for justice overrides their fear of backlash. But where does this desire for justice come from? According to social and cultural psychologists, there are 6 value systems which form the foundations of morality. They are care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. Now, 2 of these foundations are pertinent in unmasking the corrupt, and they can come into conflict. They are loyalty to one's group, and the second is fairness and justice. Persons who are more oriented towards fairness and justice are naturally more inclined to promote transparency and therefore unmask the corrupt. On the other hand, those who are more oriented to loyalty to their own group tend to lean towards political ideologies that do not promote transparency, and they are less inclined to promote whistleblowing. So you can think of the military, or you can imagine a case where you have tribal politics, where persons will defend corrupt leaders so long as they perceive them to be members of their own group. What does this tell us? That not all persons have a natural disposition toward anti-corruption. And needless to say, historically, the conditions to incite widespread unmasking of the corrupt have not existed, but this is changing. Using their smartphones, citizens are now able to capture acts of corruption in real time and release them instantly on public sites such as YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, and other online outlets without running the risk of personal retribution or exposure. In 2013, an anonymous whistleblower sent to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ, 2.5 million electronic files exposing massive offshore corruption by banks and individuals. These advancements in technology are therefore opening the door to unmasking the corrupt for persons who so desire. They also provide anonymity to persons who previously their desire for fairness and justice was matched or beaten by their fear of backlash. My second point is that concerted effort from interest groups and cultural globalization work to promote transparency and promote people to unmask the corrupt. Earlier we mentioned 2 conflicting moral foundations, leading towards different attitudes towards unmasking the corrupt. On one side, unmasking is seen as the ultimate act of justice, and on the other, it can be seen as the ultimate betrayal. Fortunately, Professor Adam Wayetz of Kellogg School of Management did research in the early 2000s that found that people's values can be changed through concerted effort. In fact, entire countries have already begun using this information to their advantage in the fight against corruption. One example is Iceland, which developed a pro-whistleblowing organization through their government attempting to rebrand loyalty to facilitate unmasking the corrupt. Globally, there's also been an increase in interest in corruption, as evidenced by more and more data from surveys and other sources becoming available to Transparency International. Accordingly, the number of countries included in the Corruption Perceptions Index rose from 41 in 1995 to 168 in 2015. This 168 now represents 86% of countries and territories worldwide. That's an average increase of 6 countries per year. There's also a change in how the media write and report on corruption. There's now a notable lean towards linking corruption and the corrupt with the effects of their deeds. So it's now normal and popular that documentaries have titles like How Cronyism and Corruption Brought Down Detroit, The Cost of Corruption, Jamaica's Barrier to Prosperity, Gangs, Guns, and Governance in Trinidad and Tobago. This global increase in interest level results in anti-corruption attitudes being adapted to local environments, even in the absence of organized efforts at that level. I will close now by reiterating that we are seeing rapidly that the barriers to unmasking the corrupt are being broken down by technology. And more slowly, positive value changes are being achieved through cultural globalization and the efforts of local groups. This results in a public that is more interested in corruption, more educated, and more empowered. In fact, the fact that we're all here today is an example. The corrupt will be unmasked because citizens, empowered citizens, educated citizens, connected citizens will make it so. The snowball has already begun to roll. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheyenne. And now I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Shiv Sao.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My entire argument may be a rebut to the opposition's view, but I have to specify 2 of the items in Cheyenne's speech for rebuttal. Technology. We understand that technology is being used to unmask the corrupt, but it's in the infancy stage. And many times what happens is it's not digestible. Like you get some, as an argument earlier on, it comes in PDF form and you can't search it through. When we talk about open data, that is something that technology-wise we want to see develop, but right now the status quo is that it's not in a proper state to influence real change. You mentioned the military where there might be some need to keep things secret. Well, there's a movie called A Few Good Men, and the real reason that is there, a few good men, it says it right there. It's not enough people in certain organizations to change it from within. All right, so when you're doing a debate, you have to take the motion, split it apart, take it apart, and then look at the key points of it. Be it resolved that the corrupt will remain masked because citizens allow it. A powerful resolution indeed. The word that stuck out to me was citizens. I am a citizen. Many of you here are citizens. The people who served you your food, many of them are citizens. The Prime Minister who spoke this morning is a citizen. He's even more of a citizen because he was voted into power as Prime Minister. He's expected, therefore, to be a key purveyor of change and somebody we will entrust with good governance. But who gave him that power and authority? Wasn't it us, the citizens? We have the power in our collective voice. But anytime there is discourse about corruption, we become powerless. We feel complacent and far too often passive. For 2 generations, we have allowed corruption to run rampant within our countries in the highest offices and lowest offices of the public sector and the private sector. And these positions held by citizens, we have been misguided and miseducated about corruption. We have fooled ourselves into believing it's a myth, or worse yet, it's a problem that is too small and we have no control of. We have grown so accustomed to corruption that we even self-identify with it. The term Trinidadian is something that is referenced to our culture. We have allowed corruption to become part of our very lives. The comfort and ease of getting a driver's permit illegally has allegedly led a lot of people to pay small bribes. None of the officers who take those bribes have been reprimanded. What about the custom officers who illegally sign off on packages coming into this country just because of some personal gain? I kindly freeze. Now, we fool ourselves to believe that there's no consequences in these actions. You know, we believe that there's a never-ending chain of corruption happening here. That person that gets a driver's license illegally, they could very well be the person who crashes into your car, killing your father, your mother, or even you. That package that was signed off illegally, that could well have the guns and ammunition that kill so many innocent lives, or the drugs that destroy the nation. Yet we, the citizens, allow it. We do nothing. We simply pay the bribe or accept the bribe and just get on with life. The corrupt remains masked. Those are small bribes compared to the huge sums of money that were leached out of our taxpayers' pockets, our pockets. We have adopted this apathetic silence when even billions go missing. Our Treasury and Public Service are manned by citizens from the top to the bottom, right through to the middle, yet no one speaks out when white-collar crimes such as bribery, bid rigging, and money laundering are committed. There were citizens who allowed $1.6 billion to the Piarco Airport project during the years 1996 to 2001. You know how much of that money was actually spent on the airport? $0.6 billion. That means to say that $1 billion just simply vanished. Those $1 billion were transferred to overseas accounts. And I know this because I referenced Mr. Afra Raymond's video, The 3 Myths of Corruption, which if this is uploaded on YouTube, go and watch it right now. It's a TED Talk. Now, Raymond didn't just make up that figure. It was in a DPP, Director of Public Prosecution's report. So it's known to us since the early 2000s. But the suspects of this accusation walk freely today. They even thrive. Their mask is not merely placed on their face, but welded on. Those stolen monies come back to haunt us. We have entered into a time of recession. We know that our natural resources of oil and gas will be depleted soon. Yet we allowed $1 billion to just simply fly out of the airport. If I came off of the stage right now, well, let me give you some perspective actually. You take $1 billion and divide it among 1 million citizens. That will give everyone here $1,000. If I come off of the stage right now and start taking $1,000, you'll stop me. You'll have me arrested. But how come this same robbery took place? Nobody does anything. Nobody. Instead, those stolen monies are floating around in the pockets of Mr. Big Fish, emphasis on the ish. And no matter how much we do pray, our heart is never at ease. Fear. We have to talk about fear. Because there's a old saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But that's not altogether true. The 1991 Nobel Peace Prize winner, Aung San Suu Kyi, once said that it is not power that corrupts, but the fear of losing power for those who wield it. That is the truth in Myanmar, as it is in the USA, as it is in the UK, as it is here in Trinidad and Tobago. It cannot be that every person is corrupt. If it was so, Trinidad wouldn't be a sinking ship, it would be at the bottom of the ocean. If those men and women, citizens who fear losing power, they only want financial gain to themselves, their friends, their family. We, the citizens, have the power to reverse this, yet we spend decades in silence, fearing the repercussions of doing the right thing. Far too long we have masked these fakes and phonies, these thieves and cronies, and we presently live in a hush-em-out society. Let me just end with this. Remember, it is not power that corrupts people. It is people that corrupt power. Thank you very much.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Rondell Keller.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I'd like to, first of all, say Happy International Women's Day. And I realize the crowd is made up of a vast majority of women, so I'll look at the corruption of men specifically. Before I begin, Madam Moderator, I'd like to rebut some points made by the proposition team. And after that, I would like to look at the current state of affairs here in Trinidad and Tobago and how we operate here in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll also look at pointing, and my final point will be that of a countercurrent to the perception that there's a culture of corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. To rebut, we have the proposition team coming here and basing their argument on what currently exists. But the motion specifically says that the corrupt will not be unmasked. Will. We look to the future. And when as we see their arguments unfolded, they looked specifically at the now and not looking at the trajectory for the next 5 or 10 years. Another thing was that they intended to expand their definition of citizens so wide so as the judiciary would be included, where I think that's a very unfair judgment, to put the burden of conviction of the unmasked by the evidence given by ordinary citizens such as you and me is unfair. Madam Moderator, the current situation here in Trinidad and Tobago is this. We have no real major legislation that takes the unmasked by the evidence given by our citizens to court in a very effective manner. We have no whistleblower legislation as of yet. I say yet specifically because we look to the future, we may be getting one very soon. There's fears, real fears of retaliation, as we have seen in recent examples that those who we have considered untouchable have been victims of crime. We don't have to go very far in our history, but we can look at Ms. Dana Sitahal. Madam Moderator, that does not mean that we, the citizens, hold back on our duty. Alan Cutler, a Canadian whistleblower who came at this very same conference in 2011, said that a whistleblower must be able to bear hardships if he wants to be a whistleblower. I don't have to go very far in our history, and I can point to you examples of where whistleblowers bore hardships here in Trinidad and Tobago. In our very early history, we have Ms. Jean Miles, who whistleblew on the gas station racket. And not too recently, not too far ago, we have Ms. Ruth Marchand, who whistleblew against the corruption within the live sport. I remember our proposition team saying that no one comes forward. Is Ms. Ruth Marchand no one? We have citizens coming forward here in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's not being recognized by the proposition team. People speak out, and therefore that goes to show that there's a countercurrent to the perception that we will accept this culture of corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. We see that public education and a social awakening is taking place in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Moderator. We see that the civil society and organizations made up of the said citizens that you mentioned, the proposition team. We have the JCC and the same TED Talks, which you referenced in your speech, as helping us open up and understand the culture of corruption in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore we should not accept it. We also have Fixing TNT, who arguably in the last 5 years was responsible for helping us understand a lot of the corruption that took place. We also have Transparency International, being established here in the late 1990s, and having the advocacy and legal advice centers, over which in the world we have over 100,000 cases being reported since 2003. All these civil society organizations, Madam Moderator, goes to fight that same Trinidad and Tobago 9 days mentality. These civil society organizations, Madam Moderator, keep corruption on our national agenda. Our headlines have been headed with corruption issues throughout. We have the issue that corruption, because of the work of these civil society organizations, we see that corruption, we begin understanding its impacts. And he was well able to tell us the impacts of corruption. And we start understanding that corruption is our true enemy to development. And therefore, we the citizens will unmask the corrupt. We don't allow it. Investigative journalism has awakened us even in a greater way when we look at the investigations created by journalists in Section 34 and even called a hat, which bore its head in the 2010 general elections. The investigative journalism is also was very crucial in the 2015 general election. Social media, as my colleague mentioned, Madam Moderator, is also a very useful tool here in Trinidad and Tobago. You see, by the very definition that the proposition team would have given us for corruption was that of the misuse of one's power. We have seen social media being used to expose, unmask, remove by blowtorch that mask that's welded on of those who abuse their power. And it goes very simply as that example that we had a year ago where a student used his cell phone to record a teacher abusing his power and taking the lunches that were provided there for the students. That, to me, is the very basic example of we ordinary citizens, a schoolboy having not reached the age of majority as yet, using his cell phone to unmask somebody who's abusing their power and thereby corrupt. Madam Moderator, as I close, I would like to re-emphasize that the motion says a will, and we citizens will unmask, as we have shown to you a trajectory from the past to now with the civil society, with social media, that we the citizens are not standing any longer for what corruption is. And I'd just like to close also by pointing out to the proposition team that yes, licensing officers have been convicted, as a recent example in St. Helena, where a sting operation was held against a licensing officer who was taking bribes. I close. Thank you.
For summation, I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Shiv Sao.
I'll tell you what, if you have to get in a fight about corruption, make sure it's not against Transparency International. They come with a lot of facts and figures, but one thing about the debate is that when you take the affirmative, you're sort of affirming the status quo. I would like to say categorically we would like to see things change when the Integrity Commission representing them, but we acknowledge Jean Mile being one of the prominent whistleblowers, and Marchand also. But what has happened to those persons? There's not proper legislation and so forth to protect these people. We understand that. But that is because the people didn't see what was happening even in the 70s with O'Halloran, late 60s and 70s with O'Halloran, to develop something that will be present now. Section 34 was actually a really corrupt bit of law. Like if it had actually passed, it was eventually repealed, that is. But you could see that even the perversion of our parliament is happening. You mention it as something that it's a matter of change, but really and truly, that was a perversion. Now, the purpose of this debate was not to create division, but to educate. If you now understand that the corrupt among us are masked and protected because of citizens' inability to act, then you must accept this motion as truth. Our bench has focused on defining what is corruption, who are the citizens, and how they have allowed the corrupt to remain masked. The opposition had said that institutions and change in legislation would change the status quo, but this is incorrect. The success of these institutions and legislations hinge upon the people who form them and enforce them. Presently, they have failed on all accounts. There's a brilliant calypso by Dr. Slinger Francisco, The Mighty Sparrow, that I actually referenced in last year's Integrity Commission debate, but it has to be brought back here. It's named The Good Citizen. It was released in 1971. It has the word citizen in it, where he sings about corruption in Trinidad in 1971. And he says, they go unpunished, not accused of any crime, while on the backs of the ordinary man, these vultures climb. They use their money and their power, make a mockery of the law, and have the law protect them same time. That was 45 years ago. Sparrow sang that, and it's still relevant to us today. Though our bench acknowledges the power of the Whistleblower Protection Bill, it has not been enacted into law, and we ask, how long? When a case in Trinidad and Tobago could take about 10 years. We affirm that legislation and institutions alone will not be our saviors, Madam Speaker. We, the citizens, must make a personal change in our policy about corruption. It was us, the people, the citizens, to stop corruption. But presently, we encourage it and accept it as part of our daily lives. Those who have mastered this sinister practice walk among us masked and silently known, though. But we begin to fear those citizens because of the mass that they're living in. I just want to end by saying, it's time to blow your horn. It's time to blow your whistle, all right? But if we don't do that right now, the corruption masquerade will continue indefinitely. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Rondell Keller.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, again. I come here a little more sober this time. All my pent-up energy is gone after I've been refused so many points of information by the proposition team. Madam Moderator, this debate, as my colleague rightly pointed out, is not to divide us, but to educate. And we believe on the opposition team, we have educated fair enough to show that there's a projection in our history that shows that there are whistleblowers in our society, and that the burden of convicting these unmasked should not be placed on what we call the ordinary citizen. The citizens who are in the judiciary, the executive branches, and the legislative branches are not, in my opinion, ordinary citizens, and they have a special duty to help follow the motions of the will of the people, the ordinary people who are whistleblowing and kicking a fuss about corruption. We on the opposition team have shown to you that social media and cultural globalization and international cooperation help to bring down the barriers that currently prevent us, the citizens, from exercising our will and whistleblowing against corruption. Because we believe that the issue of corruption runs deep, and citizens are being greatly educated about the circumstances and the effects upon their well-being. As we understand, we are now able to calculate the price of corruption into hospital beds and roads being paved and better hospitals in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore citizens will gain that courage to protest against the corrupt acts that are taking place in Trinidad and Tobago and throughout the world. Madam Moderator, we believe that this motion, therefore, stands to be defeated, because the opposition team have rightly shown to you, throughout our history, we have had whistleblowers, and the whistleblowers are gaining greater confidence. And I think the confidence will be even more so when we have properly enacted whistleblower legislations with properly coordinated mechanisms to whistleblow. Madam Moderator, I thank you for this opportunity to contribute on this motion, and I hope that all of the audience has a greater courage to go out there for this Transparency International debate here today to become a stronger whistleblower. I thank you.
And now it's over to the audience. After that tremendous effort from these speakers here, the effort now is all yours. So I ask you once again, the motion is, be it resolved that the corrupt will remain masked because citizens allow it. All in favor? All against? I therefore declare the winners Shiv Sao and Megan Gomez. But I think that was an extremely well-fought debate. We don't have much longer to go this afternoon, just one more thing. But I hope that we will perhaps come away feeling more hopeful that citizens can and will make a difference. We've had enough information given to us today and enough very powerful and potent speeches about how citizens have made a difference around the world for us all to see that one by one step at a time, all of us can do something to change the levels of corruption in this country, and that we can unmask the corrupt in our own ways, whether it is by joining civil society groups or by standing up for the good fight in our homes and in the places that we work. So despite the fact that Megan and Shiv have won today, I hope that we will leave here hopefully to make a difference ourselves. Thank you.